Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, March 1st, 2024. Our Chairman's Report this week is written by John Linder in response to some questions he received. John was the original sponsor and proponent of the FAIRtax and led the fight to keep the bill before Congress. He's extremely gratified that the House has agreed to submit the FAIRtax to an up or down vote in this session. John has also started a Substack to enhance his ability to comment on the FAIRtax and other issues of importance. There's no charge to join, and John invites you to do just that. Now here are his answers to some common FAIRtax questions. First, how does the FAIRtax address inherited wealth if the estate taxes are repealed? Well, as to the building of generational wealth, all wealth is ultimately spent. If not spent by the creator of the wealth, then it's spent by his or her heirs, but it is all spent. When it's spent on new retail goods and retail services, then the FAIRtax will be paid at that time. Under the present income payroll tax system, many times wealthy heirs use the inherited assets, obtain loans secured by the assets, use the loan funds to purchase assets like yachts, and pay only a small amount of interest and no federal income tax. Money donated to genuine charities is ultimately given to people who spend it, and then it's subject to the FAIRtax. Today, many of the wealthy, Gates, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, for example, have created foundations and fund them with charitable donations to further their political or business pursuits while gaining huge federal income tax advantages. For example, if someone had stock with a cost basis of $1 and they sold it for $501, then they would have a capital gain of $500, which would be taxed at a minimum of 20% or $100. But by donating their stock to their personal foundation, they're allowed to deduct the $500 and, depending on their federal tax rate, can save at least $100 on their federal income taxes. It's alleged that the Gates Foundation gives billions of dollars to the World Health Organization and similar entities if the billions are granted to poor African nations to buy vaccines for their children from companies in which Bill Gates is a large shareholder. Second question. Won't the FAIRtax allow the wealthy to receive huge tax breaks? Well, the wealthy don't pay much in federal income taxes. The same guy who's going to jail for purloining Trump's tax returns also released the returns of many other wealthy people. And guess what? These returns show that the wealthy don't pay much in taxes. They can afford to hire the expertise to legally avoid taxes. We learned that Trump's many depreciation schedules from his real estate kept his taxes down to $750 for 2 tax years and 0 in others. But wealthy people are big spenders, at which point they'll be taxed when they spend the money. Doesn't the FAIRtax impose a 30% tax on everything you buy? Now, this is a correct statement when you add the FAIRtax on top of what you spend for new retail purchases and retail services. This is called a tax-exclusive basis. Now, we chose to treat the FAIRtax on a tax-inclusive basis because the income tax that we're replacing is quoted on a tax-inclusive basis. If you want to treat it on an exclusive basis, then let's treat the income tax the same way. The average income tax for those who pay income taxes is 14.6%. Add that to the 15.3% they pay in Medicare and Social Security, and they give the government 29.9% of what they earn. Or, to treat it like an exclusive tax and compare it to the 30% FAIRtax, it's 29.9 divided by 70.1, which is what you have left to spend. That comes out to 42.6%. Now, to be fair, would you rather give the government 30% on top of what you spend or 42.6% on top of what you take home in your earnings? Will the FAIRtax raise enough money to fund the federal government? The FAIRtax is designed to replace the money raised by the taxes it replaces. Consumption is a far more dependable predictor of economic activity than is income. Studies have been done showing the growth in consumption from 1929 through the 90s, while income stumbled many times, particularly during the Depression. We hired an economic group out of Boston to measure the comparison of revenue from income or consumption immediately after the 2010 financial recession, and the FAIRtax would have collected 10% more revenue than the income tax did. Consumption took a very short hit, while income fell off the table for several years. Does the FAIRtax increase taxes on working families? No. The FAIRtax does not increase taxes on working families. It's the only tax reform proposal in the past 50 years that totally untaxes them. That's because of the prebate. The prebate goes to every family at the first of every month. It's based on the size of the family. The prebate ensures that every family can consume new goods and retail services up to the poverty level that's determined each year by the Department of Health and Human Services. In 2023, a family of four could spend about $40,000 on new retail goods and retail services and pay no FAIRtax. If the family purchases some used retail goods, like a used car or used toys for the kids, those purchases are not subject to the FAIRtax. With the FAIRtax, are there hidden taxes in the price of retail goods? Well, here's another benefit of the FAIRtax for not only lower income people, but for everyone. Retail prices will go down. Here's why. Imagine the number of companies involved in the process of getting a loaf of bread to your table. Companies take ore out of the ground for companies to turn it into steel to build tractors and trucks. The wheat companies and the oil companies and the bakeries and the distribution companies and the retail outlets all have costs of doing business. They pay labor costs, rent, utilities, equipment, federal and state taxes, and they have to pay accountants and attorneys to avoid the taxes, and every one of those expenses increases the price of the goods that consumers purchase. The consumer is therefore paying these embedded federal income taxes in every retail purchase they make. That is not the case under the FAIRtax. Businesses add no additional federal taxes to their product's price. We all benefit by seeing retail prices go down by 15 to 25% because of competition. How does the FAIRtax give everyone a pay raise? Under the FAIRtax, every working family gets to keep their whole paycheck. No withholding, no payroll taxes. On the first of each month, they receive the prebate that eliminates the FAIRtax on all purchases up to the poverty level. They also see a price drop with the elimination of the hidden taxes embedded in the prices of retail products. Working families will see a dramatic increase in their purchasing power. Won't the FAIRtax shift the cost of administration to the states? The state sales tax departments with whom I discussed the administration of the FAIRtax being done by them are thrilled. 45 states already have systems for collecting their state sales taxes and sophisticated systems for auditing those collections. The administration of the FAIRtax will not add much complexity, and the states get paid to do it. The FAIRtax pays them 25 basis points for collecting the FAIRtax. In addition, the FAIRtax pays the retailer 25 basis points for collecting the money. I had sales tax officers from 2 states call me while I was in Congress and tell me that they would be pleased to take over the tax collection for the FAIRtax in any of the 5 states that do not currently collect sales taxes. They know how to do it, and they think the additional revenue would be helpful to them. I personally traveled to 30 states speaking about the FAIRtax and have done thousands of talk radio shows. So have the volunteers who are currently carrying the heaviest burden. All it takes is raising the money that we can use to educate more people. We'll be delighted to accept your generous contribution. In conclusion, John's article clearly makes the case for why we need to enact the FAIRtax now. We now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to either vote for the present income payroll tax system or for the FAIRtax. They either support the corrupt income tax in the IRS or they want to get rid of it. It can't be any simpler than that. They either believe in being transparent and showing Americans the true cost of government, or they don't. And they either support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the FAIRtax, or they don't. Now, if they think the FAIRtax needs to be changed, then they can propose the change. Don't condemn the entire bill because it has a flaw that can be easily addressed. And don't think for an instant there aren't any flaws in the income tax. Please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the FAIRtax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The FAIRtax collects the revenue the federal government needs to operate, but does it in a way that has the least adverse impact on our individual freedom and the least impact on our economic prosperity. With the FAIRtax, there are no tax returns to file, no records to keep. We pay our federal taxes when we make retail purchases of new goods and services. And with the FAIRtax, there's no need for the IRS. If you sell a used couch or a used jet ski online, there's no FAIRtax due on that transaction. The FAIRtax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the FAIRtax. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for Fair Taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to fairtax.org and invest in AFFT. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.